The millionaire opened the door in silence, and what he saw changed his destiny. In the living room, the sound did not come from words, but from a gesture, and from two children staring, as if begging for salvation. Among old wounds and a caregiver who carried more love than status, the truth revealed itself without needing to shout. In that moment, he understood it was not the house that broke. It was him, and only true affection could rebuild him. The Alistair mansion stood imposing on Pine Street, in the heart of London's most affluent borough. Seen from the outside, the property was a postcard of success. High walls, impeccable gardens, wrought iron gates that gleamed under the London sun. Neighbours would drive past and comment on the perfection of the residence, on the successful businessman who inhabited it, on the two twin daughters who sometimes appeared on the balcony. But no one knew what really happened when those gates closed and the world outside disappeared. Inside the mansion was a territory of heavy silences and tensions that seemed to cling to the walls like an invisible dampness. The wide corridors echoed with steps that never came, voices that never rose, laughter that had long been forgotten. The house breathed a strange loneliness, the kind of emptiness that cannot be filled with expensive furniture or imported works of art. It was as if each room held an unspoken secret, an unhealed sorrow, a tear that no one had the courage to shed. Robert Alistair woke up every morning at 5:30, a man of 42 with grey hair at the temples, broad shoulders that carried the weight of a business empire built, brick by brick. His name was respected in the boardrooms of the best commercial buildings in the city. He closed million-pound deals with a handshake, conducted complex negotiations with the coldness of someone who never lets emotions interfere with decisions. But inside that mansion, Robert was just a lost man trying to navigate waters he did not know. The twins were 9 years old, Melissa and Marianne, identical as two drops of water, but with personalities that complemented each other in a dangerous way. Melissa was the more daring one, the leader of the mischief, the one who tested limits, with an angelic smile that could deceive anyone. Marianne was more observant, quieter but no less intense. She planned while her sister executed. Together they were a force of nature that had already driven out 7 nannies in less than 2 years. The last one had left the previous week in tears, with her suitcase barely closed and her face marked by an exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. Robert still remembered the scene. The woman, a middle-aged lady named Vera, stopped at the door and looked at him with a mixture of pity and relief. "Mr. Alistair, you need to understand something. Those girls don't need control. They need love. Real love, not compensation, not presents, not money. They need you to be present, not just living here." Robert didn't know what to say. He closed the door, went back to his office, and immersed himself in the company's quarterly reports like someone seeking refuge in familiar territory. The numbers didn't lie. The numbers didn't judge him. The numbers didn't cry in the middle of the night. Because the girls cried. Every night Robert heard the muffled sobs coming from the twins' room. He would stand in the hallway, his hand on the doorknob without the courage to enter. What would he say? How could he console 2 children he barely knew? So he would return to his own room, turn on the television with the sound muted, and pretend that those sounds couldn't reach him. The house was in complete chaos. The kitchen had 3 days' worth of dirty dishes. The living room floor was sticky under bare feet. Clothes were scattered in the bedrooms, broken toys in the corners, dust covering the expensive furniture, like a shroud of neglect. Robert tried to hire a new nanny through a specialized agency, but they would come, last a few days, and give up. Some didn't even last that long. One left on the first day, frightened by something she saw or felt in that house. It was Mrs. Carmen, the cleaner who came 3 times a week just to clean, who made the suggestion. "Mr. Robert, I know a young woman. She's in desperate need of a job. Lost her husband 2 years ago, has a son to raise on her own. She's a woman of faith, hard-working, patient. Maybe she can handle it." Robert didn't even ask many questions. He was desperate. He agreed to interview the candidate on Saturday morning, between one virtual meeting and another, with the faint hope of someone who no longer really believes in solutions. On the other side of the city, in a simple neighborhood in the East End, Joanna woke up before her alarm went off. It was a habit for someone who had spent her whole life waking up early, who had learned that the day yields more when you start before the sun rises. She was 34, but her face, marked by constant worries, made her look older. Hands, calloused from so much washing, ironing, cleaning. A back that ached from carrying weight, not just physical but emotional too. The flat where she lived with her 7-year-old son, Lucas, was small but organized. Everything in its place, every corner clean, every object cared for with love. She didn't have much, but what she had was impeccable. It was a matter of dignity, of keeping your head held high even when the world seemed to conspire against you. Joanna took the CV she had printed at the corner internet cafe, folded it into 4, and put it in her worn-out bag. The paper still smelled of fresh ink, the words neatly arranged, each line telling a story of hard work and honesty, experience in cleaning, cooking, childcare, references from previous employers, all there, in black and white, proving she was someone to be trusted. "Mom, are you going to get this job?" Lucas was sitting at the table, drinking the warm, milky coffee she had prepared. The boy had her eyes, large and expressive, but he carried a worry that no child should have to carry. Since his father passed away, Lucas had matured too quickly. He learned not to ask for what he couldn't have, to understand when his mother came home too tired to talk, to be grateful for the little things. "I will, my son. God willing, I will. It's a live-in job, so I'll be there from Monday to Friday. But I'll be here with you on the weekends. Mrs. Neal has already said she can keep an eye on you during the week." "Okay, Mum. I'll take care of myself. I'm a big boy now." Joanna hugged her son, feeling her heart ache. She didn't want to leave him, but she needed that job. The bills were piling up. The rent was late. The fridge was getting emptier. There was no choice. The journey to the borough of Kensington took almost 2 hours. 3 buses, a long walk under the strong October sun. When she arrived in front of the mansion, Joanna had to check the address twice. It couldn't be here. Houses like this only existed on television, but it was the right place. She took a deep breath, smoothed down the simple blouse she had so carefully ironed, and rang the bell. An intercom crackled to life. "Who is it?" "Joanna." "I'm here. For the interview." The gate buzzed open electronically. She walked through the perfectly manicured garden, climbed the marble steps, and the main door opened before she could knock. Robert Allister was there, wearing a dress shirt without a tie, tailored trousers, a tired expression on his face. "Come in." The interview took place in the living room, a space so large that Joanna calculated 3 of her flats could fit inside it. Persian rugs, crystal chandeliers, paintings she didn't understand but which certainly cost a fortune. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands folded in her lap, trying not to look as intimidated as she felt. Robert asked the usual questions: previous experience, availability, references. Joanna answered truthfully, without making anything up, just telling her story with the simplicity of someone with nothing to hide. She spoke of the husband she had lost, the son she was raising alone, the urgent need for work. "The children, sir. What are they like?" Robert hesitated. How could he explain? How could he summarize in words the storm that was his daughters? "They are challenging, very intelligent but difficult. Many people have been through here and none have managed to establish a routine with them. I need someone firm but kind, someone who won't give up at the first difficulty." Joanna looked into his eyes and saw something she recognized immediately. Desperation. Not the performative, rehearsed kind, but the genuine sort from someone at their limit. She knew that look well. She saw it in the mirror every day. "I don't give up easily, Mr. Allister. I've learned that anything worthwhile takes effort. If you give me a chance, I'll do my best." Something in her voice, perhaps the absolute sincerity, made Robert nod. "You can start on Monday." 6 in the morning. The maid's room is at the back. Salary and benefits to be discussed, but it will be fair. Any questions, Mrs. Carman can guide you. When Joanna left the mansion, a strong wind blew and snatched the CV from her hand. The paper flew, spun in the air, and landed in a dirty puddle on the pavement. She ran to get it, but it was already soaked. The ink ran, The words dissolved. Everything became a blur. Everything except one word that remained legible in the middle of the page. Faith. Joanna looked at that word and smiled. It was a sign. It had to be. Monday arrived cold and overcast. Joanna woke at 4 in the morning, packed her clothes in a backpack, left coffee ready for Lucas, and detailed instructions for the neighbor. The journey was now familiar. She arrived at the mansion at exactly 6, as agreed. Robert received her with a quick coffee and a tour of the house. He showed her the kitchen, the utility area, the bedrooms, the office. He told her about the girls' food preferences, their school schedule, their extracurricular activities. All very formal, very impersonal, as if he were giving instructions to any new employee, not to someone who would be caring for his daughters. They're still asleep. It's better this way. When they wake up, I'll introduce you. If there's any problem, find me in the office. But only if it's really necessary. I have important meetings today. He left before Joanna could reply. She stood there, alone in that enormous house, feeling the weight of the silence. She started with what she did best: cleaning. She tidied the kitchen, which was in a lamentable state, washed mountains of accumulated dishes, mopped the sticky floor, organized the pantry. She worked in silence, letting only the sound of running water and the cloth scrubbing surfaces fill the air. That's when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Light, calculated, almost feline steps. She turned and saw the two girls standing at the kitchen entrance, Melissa and Marianne. Identical as mirrors, with long brown hair, dark eyes that observed her every move, neutral expressions that hid much more than they revealed. "Good morning, girls. I'm Joanna. I've come to look after you." No response, just that fixed, appraising stare, as if they were studying prey. Joanna felt a shiver down her spine, but she kept her smile. "Are you hungry? I can make your breakfast." "We know how to make our own food," said Melissa, her voice firm and defiant. "We don't need you," added Marianne, softer, but no less cutting. "All right, but if you need anything, I'll be here." The girls turned and went back upstairs. Joanna heard a door slam forcefully upstairs. She took a deep breath. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Mrs. Carman had warned her. But she had faced worse things in life. 2 spoiled children wouldn't make her give up. The first few days were a silent war. The twins did everything to drive her away. They put washing-up liquid on the stairs, making Joanna slip and almost fall. They swapped the sugar for salt in the jar, ruining the coffee she had prepared so carefully. They spread glue on the broom handles, on the door pulls, on the doorknobs. They hid clean clothes and then accused Joanna of losing them. They made noise all night, preventing her from sleeping. They purposely spilled juice on the freshly washed floor. But Joanna didn't react like the others. She didn't shout, she didn't threaten, she didn't complain to Robert. She simply continued doing her job. She cleaned the soap from the stairs without a word. She made new coffee without getting irritated. She removed the glue with infinite patience. She washed the floor again, as many times as necessary. And she started to sing, softly, almost in a whisper, as if she were talking to the walls. Old folk songs, church hymns, simple melodies her grandmother used to sing when she was a child. The music began to spread through the house like a gentle virus. It invaded the corridors, climbed the stairs, entered through the gaps under the doors. At first, the girls pretended not to hear, but gradually Joanna noticed subtle changes. Melissa would stop in the middle of the hallway, as if listening to something distant. Marianne would sometimes hum quietly when she thought no one was listening. Joanna also began to change the house. Small details, nothing too obvious. A vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen table, the smell of home-cooked food replacing the musty odor that permeated the rooms. Opening the windows in the morning, letting the sun in and the air circulate. Suggesting mealtimes, not imposing them. Playing soft music during dinner, creating small rituals like a moment of silence before eating. A simple thank you for the food on the table. Robert watched it all with suspicion. Several times he appeared in the kitchen expecting to find chaos, but found order instead. He expected to hear complaints, but Joanna just smiled and said everything was fine. He didn't understand. How did she put up with it? Why didn't she give up like all the others? One evening, 2 weeks after Joanna's arrival, Robert came down for dinner. Something he rarely did. He usually ate in his office between emails and spreadsheets. But that night something pulled him to the dining room. Maybe it was the smell of the stroganoff Joanna was preparing. Maybe the soft music coming from the kitchen. Maybe just curiosity to see how his daughters were dealing with the new employee. To his surprise, the girls were sitting at the table, quiet, waiting for their food. They weren't fighting. They weren't breaking anything. They weren't making a scene. Just sitting there with empty plates in front of them. Cutlery arranged. An almost civilized posture he hadn't seen in years. Joanna brought the food, served each of them carefully, and before anyone started eating, she folded her hands and said softly, "Let's give thanks for the food on our table today." Melissa and Marianne exchanged glances, but didn't protest. Robert, uncomfortable, remained silent. Joanna said a short, simple prayer, thanking for the food, for the house, for the opportunity to be there. Then they began to eat. The dinner passed in silence, but it was a different kind of silence. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating one from before. It was a reflective, almost respectful silence. Robert watched his daughters eat with appetite, watched Joanna serve with attention, watched how the house seemed to breathe differently. When he finished, he took the phone that was in his pocket, and instead of rushing back to the office, he left the device on the table. The girls noticed. Joanna noticed. Robert also noticed his own gesture and was surprised with himself. The following Saturday, a day Joanna had off but decided to stay to get some tasks done, Robert appeared in the kitchen with an unusual proposal. "Can I make my own coffee?" Joanna looked at him confused. "Of course, Mr. Allister. The kitchen is yours. It's just that I've never made coffee. There's always been someone to do it." "Then it's time you learned," she replied with a smile. Robert fumbled with the filter, got the measurement of the grounds wrong, added too much water, burned the first attempt. Joanna watched him without interfering, letting him learn by trial and error. On the third try, he managed a decent coffee. He drank it right there, standing, looking out the kitchen window at the garden he hadn't seen in months. It's hard, isn't it? Doing the simplest things. Joanna didn't answer immediately. She just continued chopping vegetables for lunch. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "What's difficult is doing something you've never been taught, but anything can be learned, sir, including how to be present." The sentence hung in the air like an uncomfortable truth that no one wanted to touch but was there, undeniable. Robert finished his coffee in silence and returned to his office. But something had changed. A tiny crack had formed in the wall he had built around himself. The house was starting to breathe again. But as always happens when things seem to be getting better, a shadow from the past was about to return and test everything that had been built. The following week, an unexpected visitor would cross that gate and bring with her a forgotten perfume, old promises, and intentions that were anything but pure. Joanna didn't know it yet, but the real battle was just beginning. The perfume arrived first, a sweet, expensive scent that invaded the mansion like an uninvited memory. Joanna was in the living room, folding clean clothes, when she smelled it coming from the entrance. Strangely familiar but impossible to place. It was as if the entire house had held its breath for a second, waiting for something. The doorbell rang. Once, twice, 3 times, insistent. Joanna went to answer, never imagining that this simple act would change everything. She opened the door to find a woman of about 40, tall, dressed with studied elegance, impeccably styled blonde hair, perfect makeup, designer clothes, shoes that probably cost more than the rent on Joanna's flat. But it wasn't her external appearance that caught the eye. It was her eyes, cold, calculating, measuring every detail with the precision of someone assessing a territory. "Good afternoon. Can I help you?" The woman smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Patricia Allister. I live here, or rather I used to. I've come to visit my daughters." Joanna felt her heart leap. This was the girl's mother, the woman who had left years ago and left behind a void that was still bleeding. Robert had never spoken much about her. He had only mentioned once, in passing, that his wife had left when the twins were 5. Nothing more, as if the subject were forbidden territory. "Of course, madam. Please come in. I'll let Mr. Allister know. No need. I want to see my daughters first. Patricia entered as if reclaiming possession of something that had always been hers. She walked through the corridors with familiarity, touching objects, looking at the paintings, evaluating every change. Joanna followed her in silence, not quite sure what to do. This was strange. It was outside any protocol she knew. The twins were in their room doing their homework. Joanna had established a routine with them. After school, a snack, an hour of rest, then homework, and only then could they play. At first they resisted furiously, but gradually they began to accept it. They even started to like the predictability, the feeling that someone cared enough to create structure. When Patricia opened the bedroom door without knocking, the two girls looked up from their notebooks and froze. For an infinite moment, no one said anything. Melissa was the first to react. She dropped her pencil, stood up slowly as if seeing a ghost. "Mum?" The word came out so quietly, so laden with a mixture of doubt and hope, that Joanna felt like crying right there. Marianne remained seated, but her hands were trembling over her notebook. "My princesses, how you've grown. You're so beautiful." Patricia knelt and opened her arms. Melissa ran into the embrace with the urgency of someone who had waited a very long time for that moment. Marianne went more slowly, more suspicious, but she went. The three of them stood there, hugging, and Joanna realized she was in the way. She left the room discreetly, closed the door carefully, and went downstairs to tell Robert. He was in the office, as always. When Joanna knocked and entered, Robert didn't even look up from his computer screen. "Mr. Alistair, Mrs. Patricia is here. She just arrived. She's with the girls." Robert became completely still. Then, slowly, he turned his chair and looked at Joanna as if she had spoken in another language. "Patricia? Here?" "Yes, sir. She said she came to visit her daughters." Robert stood up abruptly, knocking over some papers on his desk. He left the office almost at a run, taking the stairs two at a time. Joanna stayed downstairs, hearing muffled voices coming from the upper floor. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Robert was angry. Very angry. 10 minutes later, he came down with Patricia by his side. The two were talking quietly, but you could feel the tension. They went into the living room and closed the door. Joanna went back to her tasks, but she couldn't stop thinking about that woman. There was something wrong there, something she couldn't define, but that made her instincts scream warnings. Upstairs, Melissa and Marianne were sitting on the bed, side by side, processing what had just happened. Their mother had come back, the mother who had abandoned them, who had promised to return and hadn't, who had disappeared without explanation and left a huge hole in their lives, and now she was there, in the living room, talking to their father as if nothing had happened. "Do you think she'll stay?" asked Marianne, her voice so low it was almost lost. "I don't know." Melissa was nervously fiddling with the drawstring of her hoodie. "I don't think so. She never stays. But she said she misses us. She said she always thought about us. She said that last time too." Marianne didn't reply. She vaguely remembered the last time her mother had appeared, more than a year ago. She stayed for a few hours, brought expensive gifts, promised she would be back soon, and then disappeared again. No calls, no messages, nothing, as if they didn't exist. In the living room, the conversation between Robert and Patricia continued to be tense. "What are you doing here, Patricia?" "I came to see my daughters. I'm still their mother, aren't I?" "Mother," Robert repeated the word with bitterness. "You lost the right to call yourself that when you abandoned two small children without looking back. I didn't abandon them. I left because I needed to find myself. You know how I was, that depression, that feeling of being trapped, of not being able to breathe. I had to. And them? Didn't they need you? Do you know what I went through trying to explain to two 5-year-old girls why their mother had gone away and wasn't coming back?" Patricia looked away. Was there genuine pain there, or just a convincing imitation? It was hard to tell. "I know I made mistakes. That's why I'm here. I want to fix things. I want to be part of their lives again." Robert let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Part of their lives, how? By showing up once a year, bringing gifts and then disappearing? Because that's what you do, Patricia. You play at being a mother when it's convenient for you. This time is different. She moved closer, touched his arm with studied delicacy. I'm in a better place now. I've had therapy, worked through my issues. I have a new job, stability. I want to participate in raising our daughters. You don't have to do this alone. I'm not alone. I've hired someone who is doing an excellent job with them. Ah, yes. The maid. Patricia said the word with almost imperceptible disdain. I saw her. She seems dedicated. She's more than dedicated. She's achieving what 7 other people before her couldn't. She's creating routine, stability, something that resembles a home. But she's not their mother, Robert. As dedicated as she is, she's an employee. The girls need their real mother. Their real mother had 4 years to show up and didn't, except for that flying visit last year that only served to make them more confused. Patricia didn't answer immediately. She sat on the sofa, crossed her legs elegantly, and her face took on a calculatedly vulnerable expression. I know I haven't been perfect, but I want a chance to change that. Let me spend some time with them. No pressure, no rush. I just want to be close, to show that I care. Robert looked at her for a long moment. He knew this woman well enough to be suspicious of everything that came out of her mouth. But a part of him, the part that still remembered the woman he had fallen in love with years ago, wanted to believe that people could change. 1 week, he said finally. You can come visit for 1 week. But you won't sleep here, and you won't show up unannounced. Arrange times in advance. The girls have a routine now, and that routine will not be broken by you. Patricia smiled. It wasn't the answer she wanted, but it was a start. Thank you, Robert. You won't regret this. But he was already regretting it. The moment the words left his mouth, he knew he had made a mistake. But it was too late to go back. In the following days, Patricia began to appear at the mansion, always impeccable, always bringing gifts, always with sweet words and promises for the future. She took the girls for ice cream to the shopping center, to places Joanna could never take them. She bought them expensive clothes, imported dolls, everything money could buy. The twins were confused. On one hand, it was good to have their mother back, to feel the affection they had been deprived of for so long. On the other hand, there was something strange about her gestures. It was too sweet, too forced, as if Patricia were playing a role that didn't suit her. Joanna watched it all with growing concern. She saw how the routine that had cost so much work to establish was beginning to fall apart. The girls became agitated after their mother's visits, no longer wanted to do their homework, became defensive again. And Patricia subtly began to plant seeds of doubt. You know Joanna is just a maid, right? She's here because she gets paid for it, not because she truly loves you. The words were said with a smile, as if it were just an innocent observation. But Melissa and Marianne heard the message, and it created a crack in the fragile bond that Joanna had so carefully built. Patricia also began to explore the house when she thought no one was looking. She opened drawers, went through papers, evaluated objects with particular interest. Joanna caught her a few times, but always received the same explanation, accompanied by a polite smile. I'm just looking for some of my things I left here. You understand, don't you? But Joanna didn't understand. And the more she saw of this woman, the more uncomfortable she became. There was something predatory about Patricia, as if she were circling prey, studying vulnerabilities, waiting for the right moment to strike. Robert was changing too. He went back to working late, avoiding dinner with his daughters, locking himself in his office. Patricia's presence was unsettling everything, again. The house was beginning to return to that state of silent tension Joanna had found when she arrived. One afternoon, Joanna was preparing dinner when Patricia appeared in the kitchen. She leaned against the counter with that studied elegance and watched Joanna chop vegetables. You're very dedicated. The girls like you. Joanna didn't stop working, but she acknowledged the comment with a nod. It must be hard, mustn't it? Taking care of someone else's children. Giving so much of yourself for children who aren't yours. I care about them, Mrs. Patricia, of course you care. But it's not the same as being a mother. A mother has a special connection, a love that can't be replaced by a salary or dedication. Joanna stopped chopping and looked directly at Patricia. Sometimes, madam, The person who cares for them every day ends up creating bonds as strong as blood. Presence builds what absence destroys. Patricia's smile froze for a second, then it returned, harder this time. It's good for you to remember your place in this house. You're an employee. I am the mother, and mothers always come back for their children. She left the kitchen, leaving that sweet, threatening perfume in the air. Joanna went back to chopping the vegetables, but her hands were trembling slightly. She knew she was on dangerous ground. That woman hadn't come back for love. She had come back for another reason. But what? At night, when the girls were already asleep, Joanna heard raised voices coming from the office. Robert and Patricia were arguing. She couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable. There was anger there, old resentment being unearthed. The next day, a Saturday, Robert called Joanna for a talk. He looked exhausted, with deep, dark circles under his eyes and a worrying pallor. "Joanna, I need to ask you a favor. Patricia is taking the girls out for the day. It will be the first time she's done it alone. I need you to be on alert, in case they need anything." "Of course, Mr. Robert. You can count on me." But there was something in his expression that worried her, a doubt, an unspoken fear, as if he were leaving his daughters with someone he didn't fully trust. The girls left with Patricia, excited. She had promised to take them to the park, to the cinema, to dinner at a fancy restaurant. They would only be back at night. Joanna used the day to do a deeper clean. She swept, mopped, organized cupboards. Working always calmed her mind. It was while cleaning the office that she saw it. There was an open folder on Robert's desk, full of legal documents. Joanna wasn't one to pry into her employer's things, but some papers had fallen on the floor. When she bent down to pick them up, she couldn't help but read the heading: Petition for Custody Review. Patricia was filing a lawsuit to get shared custody of the girls, and, according to the documents, she was claiming that Robert was neglectful, that he left his daughters in the care of strangers, that they needed a mother's presence. Joanna felt her stomach turn. It all made sense now. The gifts, the constant visits, that sudden interest. Patricia hadn't come back for love. She had come back to reclaim something she considered hers by right, and she was willing to destroy anyone who stood in her way. She put the papers back carefully, but her mind was racing. Should she tell Robert? But he probably already knew, since the documents were in his office. So why hadn't he said anything? Why hadn't he warned Joanna that she was being used as evidence against him in a custody battle? The girls returned late at night, tired but happy. Patricia dropped them off with kisses and hugs, promising more outings soon. After she left, Melissa and Marianne went straight to their room. Joanna went up to help them change, but they were different, more withdrawn, less accessible, as if something had changed during that day. "Joanna," Marianne called as she was leaving the room, "is it true you only look after us because you get paid for it?" The question hit Joanna hard. She turned back, sat on the edge of the bed between the two girls. "Do you think that's the only reason?" Melissa shrugged. "Mum said anyone would do what you do if they got paid the salary you get." Joanna took a deep breath. She chose her words carefully. "It's true that I work here and get paid for it, but do you know what else is true? I could work in 1,000 other places. There are many houses that need a maid. But I am here. I wake up early to make your breakfast just the way you like it. I stay up when you have nightmares. I sing to help you sleep. I help with your homework even when I'm tired. I do all of this because I care, truly. You're not just a job to me. You are two special girls who deserve to be looked after with love." "But you're not our mother," said Melissa, and there was a deep sadness in those words. "No, I'm not. And I will never try to be. You have a mother, but I am here, every day, trying to do the best I can. And that counts too, girls. That is also love. It's not the same love, but it's real, and you can count on me." The two of them were silent, processing. Then, surprisingly, Marianne moved closer and hugged Joanna. It was a hesitant hug, but a genuine one. Melissa followed soon after. Joanna hugged them back, feeling tears burn in her eyes. She wouldn't let anyone destroy this. Not Patricia, not anyone. But the forces against her were more powerful than she imagined. and the storm that was approaching was about to test all the bonds that had been built with such effort. The silent war was just beginning, and Joanna did not yet know that she would be accused of something she didn't do, that she would be thrown out of the house she was beginning to call home, and that the truth would take far too long to be revealed. The rain started in the early hours of Tuesday morning, one of those London downpours that seemed to wash not just the streets, but also certainties. Joanna woke to the sound of drops hitting the roof, an irregular rhythm that matched the unease she had been feeling for days. Something was about to happen. She could feel it in the air, in that electric tension that precedes bigger storms. She got up early as always, made breakfast, organized the girls' uniforms. Routine was her refuge, the territory where she had control. But even so, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Patricia had visited the house every day the previous week. She would spend hours with the girls, talking quietly, creating confidences that excluded everyone else. Robert was increasingly withdrawn, more distant, and the house, which had breathed so well for a few weeks, was beginning to suffocate again. The girls came down for breakfast later than usual, with tired expressions and dark circles that 9-year-old children shouldn't have. Melissa poked at her food without eating, pushing pieces of toast from one side of the plate to the other. Marianne stared out the window, lost in thoughts that seemed too heavy for her age. "Are you all right?" Joanna asked, pouring juice. "Everything's fine," Melissa replied too quickly. The lie was obvious. They ate almost nothing. They picked up their backpacks and left for school with that dense silence that had returned to inhabit the house. Joanna stayed in the kitchen, washing dishes and trying to understand what was happening. She knew Patricia was poisoning her relationship with the girls. She could feel it, but she didn't know how to fight it. How do you fight against a mother, even if that mother had abandoned her children? Robert came down in a hurry, as usual. He grabbed a quick coffee, barely even looked at Joanna. He was on his phone, discussing some important business. He left without saying goodbye. Joanna was left alone in that huge mansion with only the sound of the rain for company. She was cleaning the office when she saw that the folder with the legal documents was no longer there. She searched discreetly, without moving things around too much, but couldn't find it. Robert must have put it somewhere safer, or maybe Patricia had taken it. Either way, the custody battle was underway, and Joanna knew she was caught in the crossfire. The afternoon fell grey and damp. The girls came back from school soaked, even with an umbrella. Joanna made hot chocolate, changed their clothes, put the wet ones to dry. She did those small tasks that show care, attention, presence, but the twins barely thanked her. They went up to their room and closed the door. Joanna was in the laundry room sorting clothes when she heard the doorbell. She dried her hands and went to answer. It was Patricia again, but this time there was something different in her expression. A tension, a poorly disguised urgency. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Patricia. The girls are in their room." "Excellent. I need to speak with them in private." Patricia went upstairs without waiting for a reply. Joanna stood at the bottom of the stairs, hearing muffled voices coming from the upper floor. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Her instincts were screaming warnings, but what could she do? She wasn't family. She was just the maid, as Patricia constantly made a point of reminding her. Half an hour later, Patricia came down with a smile that didn't match her cold eyes. She walked straight past Joanna without a word and left the house. The sweet, cloying perfume lingered in the air, marking its territory. Joanna went up to check on the girls. She knocked on the bedroom door but got no answer. She opened it slowly. Melissa and Marianne were sitting on the bed, hugging each other with frightened expressions. "Girls, is everything all right?" "It is," they answered in unison, too quickly, too defensively. "You know you can talk to me, right? If something is wrong, if someone asked you to do something you don't want to do." "Nobody asked anything," Melissa cut in, with a sharpness Joanna didn't recognize. "Leave us alone." The rejection hurt, but Joanna didn't show it. She just nodded and left, closing the door carefully. She went back to the kitchen but couldn't concentrate on anything. That unease was growing, turning into real fear. Robert arrived at 8 in the evening, completely soaked and in a terrible mood. He went straight to his office without dinner. Joanna prepared a plate and took it up to him, but he didn't even thank her. He was on the phone, arguing with someone, his voice tense and irritated. She left the food on the desk and went out. The night fell heavily on the mansion. Joanna was in the maid's room, trying to read a book she had borrowed from the community library, when she heard hurried footsteps in the corridor. It was the girls. They went down to the kitchen, came back up, went down again. There was an unusual agitation, whispers, something being moved. Joanna thought about going to check, but decided not to interfere. Maybe it was better to give them space. The girls were going through a difficult phase, torn between the mother who had returned and the employee who cared for them. They needed to process this on their own. The next morning, a Wednesday that dawned with a clear sky after the storm, everything seemed normal. Joanna woke up early, made breakfast, called the girls, but they came down, with expressions even more closed off than the day before. They barely touched their food. They grabbed their backpacks and left for school without a word. Robert was particularly tense. He was rummaging through the office, looking for something, opening drawers, shuffling papers with increasingly abrupt movements. Joanna was passing by the corridor when she heard him curse under his breath. "Mr. Robert, can I help with anything?" He stormed out of the office like a whirlwind. His face was red, his forehead furrowed, his eyes holding the expression of someone who had lost something very important. "Have you seen a watch? An old pocket watch, gold with a chain." "No, sir, I haven't seen any watch, damn it." He ran his hands through his hair. "It was my grandfather's. It's worth a fortune, but it's not about the money. It's the sentimental value. I swore I would never lose that watch. When was the last time you saw it?" "Yesterday. It was here in the office, in the top drawer. I always keep it there. Would you like me to help you look for it? I've already looked everywhere. It's nowhere in this office." Joanna felt a chill down her spine. A valuable watch that mysteriously disappears. Patricia snooping around the house days ago. The girls acting strangely. There were connections there, but she couldn't piece the puzzle together. "I'll have a look in the other rooms. Sometimes things turn up in unexpected places." Robert just nodded, already returning to the office to continue his search. Joanna began a methodical search of the house. Living room, kitchen, bedrooms, bathrooms, nothing. The watch had simply vanished. It was when she returned to the maid's room to get a cleaning cloth that she felt something odd. Her bag, which she always left hanging behind the door, was in a different position, slightly askew as if someone had touched it. Her heart raced. She opened the bag slowly, already knowing what she would find. And there it was. The gold watch, with its delicate chain, at the bottom of her bag, among her personal belongings. Joanna was paralyzed. This couldn't be happening. She hadn't taken that watch. She would never enter Robert's office to steal anything, but there was the evidence, planted in her things like a perfectly executed trap. Her hands trembled as she picked up the watch. She should take it to Robert immediately, explain that someone had put it there, that it was a setup. But who would believe her? The new poor maid, desperate for money. Against her word was the undeniable fact that the object was in her bag, in her room, among her things. Before she could decide what to do, she heard footsteps approaching. The bedroom door flew open. Robert entered, with Patricia right behind him, and behind her the two girls, with expressions mixed with fear and guilt. "Mr. Robert, I can explain." "There's nothing to explain." Patricia stepped forward, her voice cutting. "We already know where the watch is. The girls told me they saw you go into the office yesterday, that they heard you going through the drawers." "That's not true." Joanna looked at the twins, pleading with her eyes. "Girls, you know I didn't do this. You know it." But Melissa and Marianne remained silent, staring at the floor, refusing to meet Joanna's eyes. Patricia had poisoned them completely. She had planted doubts, manipulated their young minds, used the desperate love they felt for their mother against the woman who truly cared for them. "Robert, check her bag," Patricia insisted, her victimized tone perfectly calibrated. "I'll bet you anything the watch is in there." Joanna handed over the bag without resistance. What was the point of fighting? When Robert opened it and saw the watch, his face hardened completely. All the fragile trust he had begun to build in Joanna crumbled in an instant. "I trusted you. I let you take care of my daughters. And you steal from me?" "I didn't steal anything, Mr. Robert. Someone put this in my bag. Please, you have to believe me." "Of course you'd say that." Patricia crossed her arms, the victory barely concealed in her expression. All thieves say the same thing when they're caught. Robert looked at Joanna as if seeing her for the first time, and what he saw was no longer the dedicated woman who had transformed his house. It was a stranger, a threat, someone who had betrayed his trust. "Get your things. I want you out of here in 10 minutes. The words fell like final sentences. Joanna tried one last time. The girls know the truth. She looked directly at Melissa and Marianne. "Please, tell the truth. Don't let this happen." But the twins remained mute, trapped, between the fear of disappointing their mother and the guilt of destroying someone who had only been good to them. Patricia placed her hands on their shoulders, as if protecting them, but it was pure and simple control. "Don't try to manipulate my daughters. You've done enough damage." Joanna felt tears burn but didn't let them fall, not in front of them. With silent dignity, she gathered her few clothes, put them in her worn-out backpack. 10 minutes. 10 minutes to leave a place she had started to call home. 10 minutes to have her life turned upside down by a lie. As she passed the girls, she stopped for a second. She said nothing, just looked at them with a sadness so deep that Marianne started to cry. Melissa held her sister's hand, her eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to look up. The rain had returned, hard, relentless. Joanna left the mansion with the backpack on her shoulders and her head down, her hair sticking to her face, her clothes soaking in seconds. Behind her, the door closed with a definitive sound. Robert was at the office window watching. Patricia was in the living room with a victorious smile. And the girls were at the top of the stairs crying softly, watching the destruction they had helped create. Joanna walked through the rain with no clear destination. Her feet automatically took her to the bus stop, but she didn't even know where to go. She couldn't go home like this, defeated, jobless, accused of theft. How would she explain it to Lucas? How would she pay the overdue rent? How would she start over after this? She sat at the wet bus stop, her clothes sticking to her body, shivering from cold and anger and a sadness that was physically painful. She didn't cry, not yet. She would cry later when she was alone, when she could fall apart without an audience. For now she just sat there, watching the rain fall, feeling as if the world had collapsed on top of her. In the mansion, silence returned, but it was a different silence from the one Joanna had found when she arrived. It was worse, heavier, sicker. The corridors once again echoed with emptiness. The kitchen began to accumulate dishes again. The musty smell started to return, driving out the aroma of home-cooked food that Joanna had brought. The girls locked themselves in their room and cried for hours. Patricia tried to comfort them, but they pushed her away. They didn't want affection from her. They wanted nothing. They just wanted everything to go back to how it was before. But it was too late. The damage was done. Robert returned to his office and immersed himself in work, as he always did, when he didn't know how to deal with emotions. But this time, not even the numbers brought comfort. He kept looking at the recovered watch, the object his grandfather had left him, and wondered if he had done the right thing. There was something wrong with the whole situation, something that didn't add up. But what? The evidence was clear. The watch was in Joanna's bag. What else could it be? Patricia, for her part, celebrated in silence. She had removed the threat. The maid who was creating bonds with her daughters, who was occupying a space that should have been hers. Now the path was clear. She could rebuild her relationship with the girls. She could prove to the judge that she was a dedicated mother. She could win shared custody and eventually, perhaps even full custody. Everything was going according to plan. But she had underestimated one thing. Children have a conscience, and guilt, and lies, no matter how well constructed, eventually crumble under the weight of the truth. The following days were hell for everyone in the mansion. The girls barely ate, barely slept. They started having nightmares again. Robert tried to hire another nanny, but she only lasted a day. The house was contaminated with a heavy, toxic energy. No one could stay. Patricia intensified her visits, but the girls were increasingly distant. They didn't want to play. They didn't want to go out. They wanted nothing. They just stayed in their room, staring into space, carrying a weight they couldn't put into words. One particularly difficult night, when the screams and crying were unbearable, Robert went up to his daughter's room and found them kneeling beside the bed. Melissa had her hands clasped. Marianne had her eyes closed. They were trying to pray, even without really knowing how, just repeating fragmented words, asking for forgiveness, asking for someone to help them. Robert froze at the door, watching the heartbreaking scene. His daughters, so small, so lost, trying to find comfort in something greater, because everything around them had fallen apart, and he, their father, didn't know how to help. He didn't even know how to begin talking about what had happened. He closed the door slowly and went back downstairs. He passed by the office and saw the security cameras. The house had a monitoring system that he rarely used, but that system recorded everything. And suddenly, a doubt began to grow in his mind. What if? What if there was something on the recordings? What if he had made a terrible mistake? He sat down at the computer and began to review the footage from the past few days. Hours of recordings, different angles, moments captured that no one had paid attention to. And that's when he saw it. The truth was there, recorded in cold, impartial pixels, waiting to be discovered. And when Robert finished watching, his world collapsed for the second time in a week, because he had dismissed an innocent woman. He had believed lies. He had destroyed the life of someone who had only tried to help. And worse, he had let his daughters carry a guilt that was destroying them from the inside. The truth had been revealed. But was there still time to fix the mistake? Would Joanna forgive him? And more importantly, would the girls be able to forgive themselves? The flat in the East End had never seemed so small and yet so vast. Joanna arrived soaked, exhausted, her heart as heavy as lead. Lucas was at the neighbors and she was grateful for that. She wouldn't have the strength to explain anything right then. She locked herself in the tiny bathroom and finally allowed the tears to fall. She cried for the injustice, the humiliation, the loss of what she had built with so much effort. But mostly she cried for the girls, for Melissa and Marianne, who were being manipulated, who would carry that lie for the rest of their lives. When she got out of the shower, she put on dry clothes and sat on the edge of the bed. She needed to think. She needed to find another job fast. The rent was late, the fridge empty. But how could she look for work when her last reference had ended with an accusation of theft? Who would hire someone dismissed under suspicion of stealing? She picked up her phone and saw messages from Mrs. Carmen, the cleaner who had recommended her for the job. The woman had heard what happened through neighborhood gossip. She asked if Joanna was okay, if she needed help. Joanna thanked her, but said everything was under control. A lie. Nothing was under control. Her life had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. Meanwhile, in the Alistair mansion, Robert was in front of the computer monitor, watching for the third time the recording that would change everything. The security camera in the second-floor corridor had captured the entire scene. There was Patricia on Tuesday night, entering the office when everyone was asleep, searching through the drawers until she found the watch, and then, with calculated movements, going down to the maid's room. The camera in the utility area showed her entering Joanna's room, looking around and placing the watch inside the bag. But that wasn't all. There was more. A recording from Monday night showed Patricia talking to the girls, instructing them on what to say. There was no audio, but the gestures were clear. She was rehearsing with them, preparing them to lie. And the girls, trapped between love for their mother and fear of losing her again, had obeyed. Robert felt a rage grow inside him like never before, not just anger at Patricia for her cruel manipulation, but anger at himself for being so blind, so quick to judge, so willing to believe the worst instead of trusting someone who had shown nothing but dedication and kindness. He saved the recordings to a USB stick, printed out some frames from the footage. This would be evidence in the custody case. Patricia had not only planted false evidence, she had used her own daughters in her scheme. Any judge would see that as severe manipulation, making her unfit for shared custody. But before thinking about legal proceedings, Robert needed to do what was right. He went up to the girls' room. It was almost midnight, but he knew they weren't asleep. He could hear the muffled sobs even through the closed door. He knocked softly and entered. The two of them were in bed, hugging each other, crying. When they saw their father, they tried to hide it, quickly wiping away their tears. But it was useless. The whole house knew that no one there was okay. "Girls, I need to talk to you about what happened with Joanna." Melissa flinched. Marianne started to cry harder. Robert sat on the edge of the bed between them. "I saw the security cameras. I know what really happened." The twins froze completely. The silence was absolute, heavy as concrete. Then Marianne began to speak between sobs. "Mummy said that Joanna was going to take us away from her, that if we didn't do what she said, she would leave again and never come back. She said it was just a little lie, that no one would get really hurt." "But someone did get hurt," interrupted Melissa, her voice breaking. "Joanna got hurt. And it was our fault. We watched her get sent away in the rain, and we did nothing." The two of them completely broke down. They cried with an intensity that seemed impossible for such small bodies. Robert hugged them, holding them both against his chest, feeling his own heart break into pieces. "Your children. You were manipulated by someone who should have protected you, not used you. It's not your fault, it's your mother's. And it's mine too for not realizing what was happening. But we lied, Daddy. We let Joanna get sent away knowing she hadn't done anything wrong. How do we take that back?" Robert took a deep breath. It was a fair question. "How do you fix a mistake of this magnitude?" "We apologize. We tell the truth. And we try to do what's right, even if it's hard, even if it hurts. Are you willing to do that with me?" The girls nodded, still crying. Robert held their hands, squeezed them tightly. "Then tomorrow morning, we're going to Joanna's house. And you are going to tell her what happened. You're going to ask for forgiveness. And if she doesn't forgive us, if she doesn't want to come back, we'll have to accept it. Because some things we break in a way that can't be fixed. But at least we try." That night, for the first time in days, the girls managed to sleep. It wasn't a peaceful sleep, but it was sleep. And Robert stayed up in his office, preparing all the necessary documentation to confront Patricia and ensure she could never manipulate his daughters like that again. The next morning, Thursday, Robert woke the girls early. He made a simple breakfast, helped them get dressed, and the three of them got in the car. The twins were nervous, fidgeting with their hands, looking out the window with worried expressions. The journey to the East End took almost an hour in the London traffic. When they finally arrived at the address Mrs. Carman had provided, Robert parked in front of a simple building with peeling paint and bars on the windows. This was Joanna's world. A world so different from the mansion in Kensington. A world where every penny counted, where there were no luxuries, only the essentials, and yet Joanna had left here every day to care for children who were not hers, in a house that was not hers, because she believed she could make a difference. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. Robert knocked on the flat door and waited. No one answered. He knocked again. Silence. He was about to give up when he heard footsteps on the other side. The door opened a crack, held by the security chain. Joanna appeared, her face swollen from crying, her eyes red with the expression of someone who hadn't slept. When she saw who it was, her face hardened completely. She tried to close the door, but Robert held it. "Joanna, please, I need to talk to you. We need to talk to you. We have nothing to talk about." "Yes, we do, because I made a terrible mistake, and because these 2 girls here have something very important to tell you." Joanna looked at the twins. Their eyes were downcast, their hands clasped, visibly trembling. Something in Joanna's chest moved. As hurt as she was, as wronged as she had been, she couldn't see those children suffering without feeling compassion. She opened the door completely. The flat was tiny. A living room that served as a bedroom, an open-plan kitchen, a minuscule bathroom, but it was impeccably clean and organized. Everything in its place, Simple flowers in a makeshift vase, a crucifix on the wall. It was a home, a real one. Much more of a home than the mansion had ever been. Robert and the girls entered. They stood uncomfortable, not knowing where to begin. Finally, Robert took the USB stick out of his pocket. I saw the recordings from the security cameras. I saw everything. I saw Patricia taking the watch and putting it in your bag. I saw her instructing the girls to lie. I know you are completely innocent and I judged you without giving you a chance to defend yourself. I am so sorry. From the bottom of my heart, I am so sorry. Joanna remained silent, processing. Tears began to run down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Do you know what I went through? Do you know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do? To be thrown out in the rain without even being able to defend yourself? To come home not knowing how you're going? To pay the bills, how you're going to explain it to your son? I know, and I have no excuses, only a request for forgiveness that I probably don't deserve. It was then that Melissa took a step forward. Tears were streaming down her face, but her voice came out firm. Joanna, it was our fault. Mummy said that if we didn't do what she said, she would leave again. And we were so scared of losing her again that we did a horrible thing. We lied. We let you get sent away knowing you hadn't done anything wrong. Marianne joined her sister, also crying. We're so sorry, really. We can't sleep, we can't eat, we can't do anything, because we know we hurt someone who was only good to us. You don't have to forgive us. We understand if you don't want to. But we had to tell you the truth. Joanna looked at those two girls, so small, so broken. She thought of everything they had been through together. The initial resistance, the childish traps, the small breakthroughs, the hesitant hugs, the moments of true connection. And she remembered her own words. There are scars that late apologies cannot erase. But there was also the understanding that children are victims of adult manipulations. She sat on the edge of the sofa bed, too tired to stand. The girls approached slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. Joanna opened her arms, and the two of them threw themselves into them, crying desperately, asking for forgiveness between sobs. Robert watched the scene with a lump in his throat so tight he could barely breathe. After long minutes, when the tears began to dry, Joanna gently pushed the girls back to look into their eyes. You know that what you did was wrong. You know that you hurt someone deeply. But you are also children who were manipulated by an adult, and I can see that you are truly sorry. That's what matters. Not the mistake, but what we do after it. Are you coming back? Asked Melissa, her voice full of a mixture of hope and fear. Joanna looked at Robert. He was waiting for an answer too. She thought about everything she had been through, the humiliation, the pain, the injustice. But she also thought about those two girls who needed someone, about a house that had started to become a home, about a job that, despite everything, made her feel she was making a difference. I don't know. I need time to think, to process all of this. What you did hurt a lot, a whole lot, and it's not something that heals overnight. I understand, said Robert, but I want you to know that Patricia will no longer be coming near the house. I've already filed for a court order, presented the evidence of manipulation. The judge has determined she can only see the girls under supervision and outside the residence, and I will guarantee your job back with a corrected salary whether you return or not. You deserve that and so much more. Joanna nodded. It was a start. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. The following days were ones of deep reflection for Joanna. Mrs. Carman came to visit, as did other friends from church. They all gave different advice. Some said not to go back, that family would only bring trouble. Others said to give a second chance, that everyone deserves forgiveness. Joanna prayed a lot. She asked for guidance, and slowly she felt she had an answer. But before making any decision, she wanted to know what had happened to Patricia. Robert told her everything over the phone. The judge had seen the recordings and was horrified. He not only denied any possibility of shared custody, but also severely restricted her visits. Patricia would have to undergo therapy, pass a psychological evaluation, and could only see her daughters once a month, supervised by a social worker. The woman had tried to argue, but the evidence was irrefutable. She had manipulated children, planted false evidence, and destroyed an innocent person's life. The consequences would be long-lasting. A week after the confrontation, in the flat on a sunny Saturday, Joanna rang the mansion's doorbell. She had returned, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as someone who understood that starting over doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It means continuing, despite the wounds. Melissa and Marianne opened the door and stood frozen. Then they ran to hug her with such force they nearly knocked her over. Robert appeared shortly after, with a relieved and grateful smile. "You came back. I came back. But some things are going to be different now. I'm going home every weekend, without exception. I want to see my son grow up. And you two," she looked at the girls, "will have to rebuild trust. It won't be easy, it won't be quick. But if you're willing to try, so am I." "We are," the twins said in unison. "We promise." The house was in a lamentable state again. Dishes piled up, dirty floors, clothes scattered about. Joanna tied her apron with the same silent gesture as always and began to work. But this time, she wasn't alone. Robert appeared in the kitchen and started helping with the dishes. The girls grabbed cloths and began to clean. The furniture. It was clumsy, slow, but it was genuine. Gradually, the house began to breathe again. The smell of home-cooked food replaced the must. The windows were opened, letting the sun in. Fresh flowers returned to the table. And family dinners became sacred. Everyone sitting together giving thanks for the food, sharing stories from their day. Robert started leaving the office earlier. The girls began to share household chores. Joanna taught them how to make rice, how to fold clothes, how to organize their rooms. It wasn't an instant transformation. There were setbacks, difficult days, moments when the wounds of the past bled anew. But they persisted. They built, brick by brick, something that looked more and more like a real family. The girls started to smile again. They learned the difference between true love and manipulation. They discovered that presence is worth more than presence, that consistency builds trust, that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but choosing to move forward. Robert learned to be truly present, not just living in the same house, but actively participating in his daughters' lives. He went to school meetings, helped with homework, made breakfast on Sundays. He discovered that being a father was much more than just providing financially. And Joanna discovered that family is not just defined by blood, that love can be built on arid ground, that wounds heal when there is genuine care, that forgiveness is a gift we give ourselves as much as others. The mansion in Kensington did not become perfect again, but it became alive. It became a home. And the sound that ran through its corridors was no longer one of heavy silences or desperate screams. It was the sound of laughter, of conversations at the dinner table, of songs being sung in the kitchen, of the hurried footsteps of children who had finally learned to be children. On a random Sunday, months later, Joanna was in the kitchen preparing lunch when Lucas came to visit. The boy had become friends with the twins. They played together on weekends. Robert had set up a swing in the garden for them. It was a simple, ordinary scene, but it was perfect in its simplicity. Joanna looked out the window and saw the three children playing, saw Robert pushing the swing, saw the laughter and the lightness. She thought of everything they had been through to get there, the pain, the injustices, the silent struggles, but she also thought of the strength that comes from starting over, the beauty of not giving up, the dignity of forgiving without forgetting. She dried her hands on her apron and joined them in the garden. She sat on the grass next to Robert while the children played. The sun was shining brightly, the sky was blue, and for the first time in a long time, everyone there felt at peace. "Thank you," Robert said suddenly, "for coming back, for giving us a second chance. Thank you for giving me a first chance," she replied with a smile, "and for having the courage to admit your mistake and correct it." They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the children, feeling the gentle breeze, grateful for the present, but also aware that they had to keep working, keep building, keep choosing love every day. The story of the Allister mansion was not a fairy tale. It was a story of imperfect people trying to do their best, making mistakes, learning, growing. It was a story about second chances and about understanding that homes are not built with walls and expensive furniture, but with presence, patience, and true love. And as the sun set over London, painting the sky orange and pink, that house that was once a prison of silence finally breathed free. Because they had learned that family is a choice. It is commitment. It is being present, even when it's hard. It is forgiving even when it hurts. It is rebuilding even when all seems lost. And that is the story of how a simple woman turned a mansion into a home. Not with magic, not with perfection, but with something much more powerful. With silent dedication. With love that persists. With faith that does not give up. With the courage to start over even after being broken. Because in the end, what turns houses into homes are not the physical structures. It is the people who choose every day to be part of each other's lives. It is the small gestures of care. It is the shared dinners. It is the tears wiped away and the laughter shared. It is the mistakes acknowledged and the forgiveness granted. And above all, it is persistence. The daily choice not to give up, even when everything seems impossible. Because true homes are not perfect, but they are places where you can be imperfect and still be loved, where you can make mistakes and still receive forgiveness, where you can fall and still be lifted up. The Alistair mansion learned this the hard way, but it learned. And now, finally, it was a real home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Joanna, Robert, Melissa, and Marianne has touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of forgiveness, new beginnings, and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you most in this story. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in the most difficult situations, there is always hope to start over. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on the true meaning of family, forgiveness, and love.